Good morning, everybody. Hello, hello. Welcome to In Your Element. Ardis Kadiu, CEO and founder of Element451. And with me today, we have a special guest, Todd Heilman. Todd is our Chief Success Officer here at Element451. He's brand new to the team. Todd, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ardis. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here.
It's great having you here. Today, we're going to be talking about the Educause conference. The Educause conference was in Philadelphia this year, and this, from my understanding, this was your first Educause.
This was my first Educause conference. I was excited to be there. Wish it would have been under normal circumstances with a full conference event, but very exciting. Learned a lot. Happy to talk about it today.
So I guess we can dive right in and we can talk a little bit about, given that you're coming from the marketing enrollment world, student success side, not necessarily buying you're buying technology, but not necessarily being the CIO or having that, pulse on the technology side. Just general reactions to the conference, given that it's very CIO, CTO heavy.
Yeah, so it's a complete, I would say, the change in audience was different for me, right? As you've noted, I've been on more of what I'll say the sales oriented side, the NACAC type of conferences, the agro conferences, where you're actually more in a sales mode, whereas this was more informational, right? So the goal of the conference was a little bit different. It took a minute to digest that and understand the different scope of the conference. But overall, I felt it was great to see the CIOs and the CTOs of colleges and partner organizations to get their take on what's happening from a technology aspect in the industry. What's available today? What are they taking advantage of? What should they be taking advantage of in the future? So what's coming down the pipe? So it was interesting to see that again from a new perspective, being my first Educause conference.
Yeah. So we'll talk just a little bit about some of the IT, like Educause puts together the top 10 priorities, which this year is a little bit different in terms of the top IT issues, right? And those that the CIOs are dealing with. So we'll talk about that in just a little bit, but before we get there, just some general themes that we noticed I would say in the exhibit booth and technology providers of the institute of the conference. One of the big things about Educause is that there's a huge exhibit hall with all of the technology providers for institutions, anywhere between Google and Amazon with AWS and Microsoft, Lucien, all of the different vendors that are providing technology, including startups. They have a startup alley. So all of those folks are there. It's one of the largest exhibit halls in terms of conferences for higher education. And a lot of folks just go there because of that. So this year, there were some general themes, at least that we saw, and one of those was around the size and the presence of a lot of these vendors. So given that a lot of those decisions were made last year, we noticed that there were absences, from some of the larger vendors. So not everybody was there. Those folks who were there, they had smaller booths and the smaller setups, and there was one of the things, because of the consolidation that's happened over the past couple of years, it was very visible in terms of, having, let's say, a liaison, having a lot of different brands underneath them that now including things like Authot and Target X and so on and so forth. And you can see Anthology, a completely brand new entity now. It used to be campus management and iModules and so on and so forth. So now all of those are combined together. We did not notice Blackbaud there at all this year, and that's an interesting one. Same thing with Genzabar. They weren't there. At least they didn't have a booth. There was advertising. So consolidation, it's certainly something that's happening. But then, around the student and kind of the messaging, like what was one of the things that resonated for you, or at least that you saw most of?
Yeah, I think certainly, just to circle back, there certainly was consolidation in the exhibit hall itself and within the exhibitors. But there seemed to be, as we walked the hall, there's the common theme that we saw was around student success, student engagement, and the different, what I would say, definitions that each vendor is using around student success and student engagement. These are the buzzwords in the industry now, and what I took away from this was everyone was trying to pull those buzzwords into their product line or into their marketing material, to pull people in to talk about those things, because we know that campuses are struggling with student success, student engagement, and overall persistence and graduation rates. So I took that as the buzzwords, as we walk through the hall there, and it was interesting as we stopped to talk to the various vendors to get their definition and how they saw their product fitting into student success and student engagement.
So how do we, I mean, you've been on campus and on your side, like you were literally there a month ago. How do you cut through those buzzwords, or how do you think about them?
Yeah, so right, again, it's great that everybody uses those buzzwords, but I think where you've got to go beyond the words themselves is showing the value, right? And the value has to be visible and it has to be tangible. And I didn't see a lot of that as we walked through the exhibitor hall. I saw the buzzwords, but I didn't see the value nor the tangible value, at least coming through their marketing material. Obviously, some we've talked to and we did see what they were doing, and some were doing some interesting things. But overall, I think as we talk about student success and we talk about student engagement, many are looking at small facets of that overall student timeline and calling it
Mhm.
student success, right?
Right.
So they may be looking just at the LMS and saying, we're impacting student success with our LMS, and they may be, but that's only a small piece of it.
That's very interesting because, as we know, obviously student success, but then student engagement as well. Like we're talking about, there's specific tools that are just
Right.
added on to the LMS component, and they're talking about, hey, we're increasing student engagement. It's like, well, you're just adding another quiz component or another interaction type module within that. It's like, how do you value that in the grand scheme of that student being able to complete that class or that course, or their success overall in graduating? So the engagement part is like anything that student touches and interacts with, it's just labeled as engagement, right? And that's
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there was one vendor there who was, their marketing material was all around that student engagement. And as we dug deeper into their product, it was a mobile app, and all they were doing was taking these disparate systems and pulling them into their mobile app. So it was one central app that allowed students to access 40 different applications within the app. And they're calling that, an increase of student engagement, which in theory, it could be more clutter than if it was all separate. So things like that are interesting to see how many vendors are now scrambling to impact what the challenges are on campus, specifically around these buzzwords of student success and engagement.
Yeah, that's interesting to show the ROI and the kind of the top IT issues that are seen. The one other thing that we saw an increase in is a lot of security vendors as well. So security and kind of this idea of security and campus security applications. So how do schools deal with that? I think that was a really interesting kind of theme as well. We've seen many institutions now being impacted by ransomware and so on and so forth. So now that security is really top of mind for a lot of different institutions. And you saw it in terms of the vendors and kind of what they're providing that. And there was a whole lot of them out there. Obviously, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication vendors, like all of those were there, and they're taking a more central place in kind of managing those accounts for students. And as again, it's interesting, right? As the proliferation of the apps is happening, there's more and more apps. You need now better centralized security around them because of that. So yeah, I mean that experience is getting fragmented a little bit more as well. So was there anything else before we kind of talk about some of the items or some of the high level?
No, just quickly, I think that's a very good point that you're bringing out. Aside from the again the student success and engagement piece, the other piece that we did see that dominated the exhibitor hall was all around security. So I think that's a really interesting observation that you've had, and that's where campuses are now looking at. As they're bringing in all these various different vendors and disparate functions. How do they keep the campus secure? How are they controlling the data integrity? And that was very visible on the exhibitor hall there.
Yeah, exactly. So looking at the top IT issues, this is surveys that are taken, and Educause does this every year in terms of the technology leaders and CIOs, and but in this case, it's talking about like some of the themes. And if you haven't looked at the report, just search for top IT issues, Educause IT issues survey, and then you'll get the result. But this is a nice little infographic, and what they've done this year is that they have put together, and because there's this post-pandemic, there's 3 different types of levels of institutions and where they are in their thinking around IT. They split them up in order to make it a little bit more accurate to the type of institutions and where they are, rather than bundle them all together, the 1 through 10. So there's 1 through 5 for specific types. So you have 3 different types of institutions. Those that are in kind of the restore, evolve, and transform kind of phases. But there's specific definitions around each one of those. The restore portion is institutions of greater financial risk that may not, there may also be those whose students are struggling the most, right? This notion of evolve is kind of adaptive evolution to kind of meet, the set of evolve issues describe as kind of a student-centric institution that is kind of managing its primary risks right now. And kind of the third one, which is the transform bucket, is really, some institutions that plan to accelerate because of the pandemic, accelerate and launch their transformation agenda, right? So we have 3 different types of schools in here, or at least institutions that are in different stages. But let's take a look at that first one, which is the kind of this restore. And a lot of institutions fall under this because they're at risk financially, and we know that a large portion of institutions are very tuition driven. So what we see here is that cost management is top of that, top of line here. The financial health, of course, online learning. It's like, well, how do we provide different modalities now to that student so we can have better offerings, so we can increase our retention, and we can kind of increase the ability for us to attract those students on board. But cost management, and that's number 1. And essentially, it's just reducing institutional cost and increasing workforce efficiency. So as you look at IT, systems, having multiple systems and kind of consolidating them becomes even dire, because the less you have to manage, the less cost, the less technology footprint, and the more efficient you can become. So that's something that's coming up over and over, where in the past it was like best of breed, and you're able to buy one and another, and then kind of put them together, and now we're seeing the reverse, right? It's like the consolidation again,
Right.
but now the consolidation on the campus side.
Yeah, it's interesting. And again, just coming off campus recently, this says top IT issues, but cost management was the top issue campus wide, right? For many institutions, it's not just in the IT area; it's across all budget areas of the institution. But one of the things that many are doing is first looking at all of their contracts, right? What are all of the vendor contracts that we have? What can be cut? What can be consolidated? And there's really I would say a magnification on that now in order to determine where those efficiencies can occur or if they're possible, right? Because online learning, you leap from cost management to online learning. Online learning is only going to expand. I think we are forever changed in this hybrid environment. But the first step of cost management is where many institutions have found themselves over the past year, and will continue to find themselves until they evolve and transform.
Exactly. And it's really, really hard to do that when you have a fixed cost, which essentially is your faculty, one of the largest costs to the institution. Um, so yeah.
Yeah. So the pressure really becomes around how do you move from that restore to evolve, right? And how as an institution do you not, when you look at your cost management strategy, how do you not cut too severely, right, and have the opposite effect? And how do you invest properly in order to evolve and invest in areas that have the highest ROI? And those are specifically around student success functions and
Right.
these online and information security. So I think that's where institutions just really have to take a look at their strategic plan. They've got to sit down at the president's cabinet level and start to look at these functions and prioritize accordingly. And that's where, as we evolve and we move into this transformation phase, that's where the most value, and those who are able to do that efficiently will move through each of these phases.
Yeah, that's um, so as you look, obviously this first two are pretty similar types of institutions, and kind of the priorities are very similar, right? So we talk about cost management, financial health, we talk about online learning, information security. So information security being another one of those that we saw on the trends. But then, things like student success come up, right? So it's really, really hard to start recruiting more students and to invest in recruiting when you can make a huge impact on the current students that you have, and provide better access to those students, provide better technology, provide better kind of education and offerings. So how do you make those students that you have succeed first, or go through your program, rather than trying to fill in the top of the funnel, and kind of enrolling more students? And you can certainly see that one of the priorities here is for those institutions that are perhaps in a little bit better situation financially, is that they're investing a lot in their enrollment and recruiting, because they see that as transformational, right? They see that as, okay, we need to now do a better job in making sure that we get the right types of students. We need to make sure that we're kind of bringing intelligence to a lot of that recruiting efforts. What we call holistic recruitment solutions, right? So you talk about, things like, okay, how do we think about not just, let's say, freshman students, but internationally? How do you think about different populations? How do we look at all that data, and how can we, affect marketing and make it be very, very instrumental to those recruitment efforts? So that's kind of the aspirational part a little bit, but I would, looking at it from as a marketer or as a strategic, from a strategic perspective, you can't not recruit. So you have to invest in your recruitment and enrollment, because that is the lifeblood of a lot of schools. So, I mean, the old saying goes, when there's a downturn, or when there's struggle happening, you cannot cut your marketing effort, your marketing, because that essentially now compounds the effect of your ability to operate, or to bring in new students next year, and now it goes through a spiral, right? Which makes it even worse. So you can't cut down on your growth engine.
Yeah, it's really easy to get caught in that spiral, as you know,
Yeah.
artists, because again, on the institution side, marketing budgets tend to be one of the higher uh,
Ticket value. Yeah,
budget,
yeah.
ticket value budget
Budgetary, yeah.
lines within a
Yep.
division. So it's very easy to look at those higher budgets and say that's where you have to cut. Where in reality, you may have to double down or invest more or rethink your marketing strategy, which obviously comes at a cost. But as you start to manage your operational costs, marketing budgets are typically front and center as being in jeopardy, where in reality, they should be the priority, and trying to rethink and reimagine your marketing strategy to ensure that it's connecting.
Agreed. Agreed. 100%. And I think we will leave it at that, right? There's a lot of material. There's a lot of marketing, certainly marketing material, thought leadership around, how do you position an institution? How do you market that? I'm actually reading Marketing an Institution, which is a new, I won't say new book, but relatively new, to kind of think about, okay, marketing as a strategic, like being part of your strategic plan, right? It's not just about your brand. It's not just about, um, you know, it's not just about kind of living outside, but it should be part of your growth engine, right? So that's the whole idea. So, anyways, um, thank you for watching us today. Certainly, some really interesting trends, Todd. It's great having you, and perhaps we'll see a little bit more of you in the future, as we need the perspective of somebody who's there on campus, and who's been on campus, and has that fresh perspective from the leadership side, which is always, we get too caught up sometimes as technologists in the technology itself, or technology for technology's sake, but ultimately we're trying to solve a problem, and we're trying to help institutions and students kind of connect and kind of succeed better. So, um, you know, bringing that perspective, it's a little refreshing. So thank you.
Yeah, this has been great. Thanks for inviting me. I look forward to doing it again.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Take care, everyone.